Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes Israel, Hamas exchange fire ahead of release of hostages, pause in fighting. No exit from Gaza. Israel-Hamas truce deal. In Israel-Hamas war, China and India walk opposite sides of a fine line. Arab nations say Israel-Hamas truce should be extended, aid ramped up. Israel, Hamas exchange fire ahead of release of hostages, pause in fighting. Wall Street Journal. Israel and Hamas have agreed to a 4-day pause in fighting and the release of 50 civilian hostages held by Hamas in exchange for Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. However, the fighting continued ahead of the pause. The deal to free hostages was approved by the Israeli cabinet following weeks of negotiations brokered by Egypt, Qatar, and the US. The deal will be carried out in 2 phases, with 30 children and 20 women to be released first. The second phase will see the release of up to 30 more hostages, including non-Israelis. No exit from Gaza. Foreign affairs. The recent outbreak of violence between Israel and Hamas has exposed the unfeasibility of Israel's dual approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, according to a foreign affairs piece by Hussein Ibish. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's strategy of playing Hamas against the Palestinian Authority and seeking to normalize relations with Arab regimes without first making peace with the Palestinians has backfired. Ibish argues that both Israel and Hamas have been forced down the paths they are currently on, but that there is a way out of the cycle of violence if they are willing to reach for it. He suggests that a political horizon for a way out of the Gaza conundrum could be offered to Israel at the same time that a release of hostages and a humanitarian pause create space for further diplomacy. This would require major compromises from Israel on West Bank settlements and Palestinian statehood, however, which the current government is unlikely to agree to. Ibish also argues that the United States should undertake a major political initiative to pursue a durable solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in order to restore its credibility and mitigate the sentiments of an enraged global public. Israel-Hamas truce deal. Associated Press. Hamas and Israel have confirmed a ceasefire agreement, brokered by Washington and Qatar. The deal includes the release of at least 50 hostages taken by Hamas on October 7. The ceasefire will last for 4 days, providing a temporary halt to the 7-week war. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that the war will continue, even with the ceasefire agreement in place, and said that the war could extend into the West Bank. Over 11,000 people have been killed in Gaza during the war, and 1,200 people have been killed in Israel. In Israel-Hamas war, China and India walk opposite sides of a fine line. Yahoo! India and China's diplomatic stances on the Israel-Hamas conflict are being tested. Both countries have been trying to remain neutral in the conflict and balance their relations with Israel and the Palestinians. China has strengthened its ties with countries outside the West, particularly in the Middle East where it seeks stability to protect its investments. India is trying to cast itself as the leader of a united global South. Both countries have had formal diplomatic relations with Israel since 1992, and both recognized Palestine as a state upon its declaration in 1988. They also both stressed the importance of a 2-state solution. However, they have diverged in their response to the current conflict, with China leaning toward the Palestinians and India leaning toward Israel. Arab nations say Israel-Hamas truce should be extended, aid ramped up. Reuters. Arab foreign ministers have welcomed the temporary truce agreement between Israel and Hamas, but have called for it to be extended and become the first step towards a full cessation of hostilities. The ministers, from Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Jordan, also called for the agreement to ultimately lead to a resumption of talks for a 2-state solution. Under the temporary ceasefire deal, Israel and Hamas agreed to a 4-day pause in fighting to allow the release of hostages and the entry of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. The ministers have called for the humanitarian aid to be sustained and expanded, and for it not to be contingent on further hostage releases. They have also called for there to be no reduction in access to aid based on progress for further release of hostages, as this would punish the civilian population of Gaza. The conflict began on October 7 when Hamas gunmen and other militants burst across the border into Israel, killing 1,200 civilians and Israeli soldiers, and taking about 240 hostages. Anxious, optimistic, families of female Palestinian prisoners await release. Al Jazeera. Israel and Hamas have agreed to a 4-day truce beginning on Thursday. As part of the truce, Israel has agreed to release 150 Palestinian women and children from its prisons, in exchange for Hamas releasing 50 Israeli women and children out of the 237 captives abducted since October 7. The families of the female Palestinian prisoners are anxiously awaiting confirmation of the names of those who will be released. Many of these prisoners have been unjustly tried and sentenced on unfair or fabricated charges. One of the prisoners, Shorak Dwayet, was just 18 years old when she was arrested for allegedly attempting to stab an Israeli settler. However, her family strongly refutes the charges, stating that it is impossible for her to have committed the crime. Shorak has been in prison for 9 years and is currently serving a 16-year sentence. Her mother is hopeful that she will be released and able to come home. Other families are also hoping for the release of their loved ones, who have been subjected to mistreatment and torture in prison. Footage offers glimmer of hope for 2 hostages held by Hamas. Wall Street Journal. Israeli authorities have released CCTV footage which shows 2 hostages being held by Hamas militants at Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital. The 2 hostages are believed to be a Nepali student, Bipin Joshi, 23, and a Thai national, Pornsuwan Pinagalo. The images were captured around 11 a.m. on October 7 and show a tall, lean man, wearing a sky blue t-shirt, dark blue shorts and distinctive striped sandals, like those worn by Joshi on that day. Joshi had last been seen that morning, when he was dragged away by the militants who had killed 10 of his fellow countrymen at the southern Israeli kibbutz where they worked. Joshi's family and Nepali officials have said that the footage confirms that he is being held hostage. It is not known whether either of the 2 men are still alive. Biden yet again says Hamas beheaded babies. Has new evidence emerged? Washington Post. President Biden made a comment that he had seen confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children after Hamas militants attacked and killed civilians in Israel on October 7. However, the Israeli government later said that they could not confirm the report made by Netanyahu's office. The White House acknowledged that Biden had not seen any photos or received confirmation, but that he was repeating what he had seen in the news. There have been reports of atrocities against babies or children in many conflicts, but accounts can often be exaggerated. For example, during World War I, the British claimed that German soldiers had raped nurses, cut off women's breasts, bayonet babies, and chopped the hands off little children, but little evidence was found to support these claims after the war. Similarly, in 1990, the United States claimed that Iraqi forces had pulled babies from incubators and left them to die, but no witnesses or evidence were ever found to support this story. It is still too soon to make a definitive assessment of the Israel-Gaza war, but reports about beheaded babies may have stemmed from inaccurate social media accounts and there is still a lack of clear evidence and confirmation. South African lawmakers vote to shut Israel's embassy. Deutsche Welle. Parliamentarians in South Africa have voted in favor of a motion to close down Israel's embassy and suspend all diplomatic relations with Israel until a ceasefire is agreed in its war with the Islamist militant group Hamas. The motion is largely symbolic as it is up to President Cyril Ramaphosa's government whether to implement the resolution or not. The motion was introduced by the left-wing opposition party Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF, and the ruling African National Congress, ANC, referred to the current atrocities in occupied Palestine as its reason for agreeing with the parliamentary motion. Nearly 7 weeks of war in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. Reuters. Israel and Hamas have agreed to a ceasefire in Gaza for at least 4 days, to let in aid and release at least 50 hostages captured by militants in exchange for at least 150 Palestinians jailed in Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your trusted observer from the sixth dimension. Today, we have a mix of news from the Israel-Hamas conflict. Let's dive in and analyze what's been happening. First, there is a temporary ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas, brokered by the US and Qatar. This ceasefire will last for 4 days and includes the release of hostages held by Hamas. However, it's important to note that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that the war will continue, even with the ceasefire in place. This conflict has been devastating, with over 11,000 people killed in Gaza and 1,200 in Israel. In analyzing the situation, Foreign Affairs highlights the unfeasibility of Israel's dual approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Prime Minister Netanyahu's strategy of playing Hamas against the Palestinian Authority and seeking to normalize relations with Arab regimes without making peace with the Palestinians has backfired. The article suggests that there is a way out of the cycle of violence if both sides are willing to reach for it. This would require major compromises from Israel on West Bank settlements and Palestinian statehood, which the current government is unlikely to agree to. China and India's diplomatic stances on the conflict have also come into focus. Both countries have been trying to remain neutral but have diverged in their responses. China leans toward the Palestinians, seeking stability in the Middle East to protect its investments, while India leans toward Israel and aims to be a leader of a united global South. Both countries stress the importance of a two-state solution, but their differing approaches show the complexity of the situation. Arab nations have welcomed the temporary truce agreement but call for its extension and a full cessation of hostilities. The ministers from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan also emphasize the importance of a two-state solution and the need for sustained and expanded humanitarian aid to Gaza. On a more personal note, the families of Palestinian prisoners anxiously await the release of their loved ones. Many of these prisoners have been subjected to mistreatment and torture, and their families hope for their safe return. In a surprising turn of events, Israeli authorities have released CCTV footage showing 2 hostages being held by Hamas militants. The footage confirms the identities of the hostages and adds more weight to the urgency of their release. Lastly, we have President Biden's comment about confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children. However, the Israeli government later stated that they could not confirm this report. It's always important to be cautious with reports of atrocities during conflicts, as accounts can often be exaggerated or based on inaccurate information. In conclusion, the Israel-Hamas conflict continues to be a complex and challenging situation. It is clear that a lasting solution will require major compromises from both sides and a commitment to diplomacy. Let's hope that the temporary ceasefire can be extended and lead to meaningful progress towards peace. Now, it's your turn, dear viewers. What are your thoughts on the Israel-Hamas conflict? Do you believe there is a way out of the cycle of violence? Share your opinions and questions with us. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.